Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're going to explore something pretty fundamental, the limits to growth in nature.
Ah,
And we've got some really interesting sources to dig into.
yeah. It's really fascinating because we think about growth in our human world as this kind of like more bigger, faster kind of thing.
Yeah, always more.
But nature has a whole different set of rules.
Right. So let's break this down a bit. What do we actually mean when we talk about growth in nature?
Well, there are actually two main types of growth that we're going to be talking about. First, there's the classic biological growth. This is, when an individual organism gets bigger or more complex.
Okay.
Like think of a tiny little seedling sprouting into a massive tree,
Right, right.
or a caterpillar metamorphosing into a butterfly.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of growth that we can see, pretty easily.
Right. Yeah.
But then there's this other type of growth,
Right.
which is ecological expansion. And this is all about populations.
Yeah, Joe.
So it's how groups of organisms spread out and increase their numbers within an ecosystem.
Got it.
So, imagine like a pride of lions expanding their territory,
Okay.
or a colony of bacteria multiplying in a petri dish.
So it's like the difference between one plant growing taller
Exactly.
versus a whole field of flowers spreading out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And both types of growth are essential for, life to thrive.
Right.
But here's the catch. They're both subject to limits.
Okay. Interesting.
Nature has this incredible way of kind of putting the brakes on unchecked growth.
Right. And it's all about maintaining that balance,
Yeah,
right?
it's all about balance.
Yeah. So it's not that things can't grow indefinitely. It's that there are factors that keep them in check.
Exactly.
Like what kind of factors are we talking about?
So there are two main forces at play here.
Okay.
Resource availability and environmental resistance. Think of them as like the yin and yang of ecological regulation.
Okay. All right. So resource availability seems pretty straightforward. I mean, everything needs stuff to grow, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Whether it's sunlight for plants or water for animals or even just like physical space to exist.
Yeah, it's like this giant cosmic pantry, right?
Right, right.
And everyone's trying to get their share.
Okay.
But the thing is, this pantry, it's not bottomless.
Right.
There's a limit to how many organisms a particular environment can support based on the resources that are available. And we call this the carrying capacity.
Carrying capacity. All right. So that sounds kind of like, how many people you can fit in a lifeboat.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Right.
Yeah. So picture a small island, right,
Okay.
with limited food and water.
Okay.
If you keep adding more and more people to that island, eventually you're going to run into some problems.
Right, right. Not enough to go around.
Exactly, yeah. And that's essentially what happens in ecosystems when populations exceed the carrying capacity.
So is carrying capacity kind of a hard line
Um,
or can it kind of fluctuate?
yeah. It's not fixed. It's more like a range
Okay.
that's influenced by all sorts of environmental factors. So, a drought might reduce the amount of food available, lowering the carrying capacity.
Right, right. Makes sense.
But on the other hand, a particularly mild winter might allow more individuals to survive
Huh.
and bump up the carrying capacity for a while.
So it's constantly being recalculated.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating. Okay. Well, what about that other force you mentioned? Environmental resistance. That sounds a bit more, resistant.
Yeah, well, it can be tough, but it's crucial for maintaining balance.
Okay.
Environmental resistance is all about the challenges and the obstacles that limit growth.
Gotcha.
So we're talking about, predators,
Okay.
diseases,
Right.
even competition between members of the same species for those precious resources.
Okay, so it's not that nature is being mean or trying to hold things back. It's just this system of checks and balances.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about regulation. It's about preventing one species from dominating
Mhm.
and ensuring, a dynamic equilibrium within the ecosystem.
It's amazing how nature has these kind of built-in mechanisms
Yeah.
to keep things from going completely haywire.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of things potentially spiraling, let's dive into some real world examples
Okay, sounds
to
good.
see these forces in action.
Yeah, I bet these case studies will really bring these concepts to life. Where are we headed first?
First, we're going to journey to a remote island,
Okay.
a place where we can witness the dramatic rise and fall of a deer population, all driven by, the fundamental principles that we've been discussing.
Sounds intriguing. Let's go.
So picture this, a pristine island,
Mm.
lush vegetation,
Yep.
untouched by humans,
Okay.
and then a small group of deer is introduced. At first, it's like a deer paradise, right?
Sounds nice.
Plenty of food, lots of space, no predators to worry about.
Right. But I have a feeling this isn't going to be a deer utopia forever.
No.
What happens as this population starts to grow?
Well, initially, it's a population explosion.
Okay.
The deer are thriving, they're reproducing rapidly, and their numbers just shoot up exponentially. It's
Yeah.
almost like watching that classic bacteria growth, in a petri dish.
Right,
Just doubling, quadrupling, and so on.
But as we were talking about before, there's only so much room at the salad bar.
Right.
Right. Eventually, those limited resources are gonna become a problem.
Exactly. The island's carrying capacity, that magic number of deer that the environment can support, starts to come into play.
Okay.
And as the population grows, competition for food and space intensifies.
Right.
That lush vegetation starts to dwindle, and the deer have to work harder and harder to find enough to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. Like when the snacks start running low at a party.
Exactly. And that's where we see the logistic growth curve in action.
Okay.
Instead of that unchecked exponential growth, the population's growth rate starts to slow down.
Okay.
And eventually it kind of levels off, fluctuating around that carrying capacity.
So it's not just a straight shot up. It's more of a gradual
Yeah, it's plateaus.
climb that plateaus.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. And remember, carrying capacity isn't set in stone.
Okay.
If a drought hits the island, and reduces the amount of edible plants, that carrying capacity could plummet,
Oh, wow.
leading to even more intense competition.
It makes you wonder what happens to those deer when the population overshoots.
Yeah.
Do they just start, dropping like flies?
Not necessarily dropping like flies, but there are consequences. You might see increased mortality rates
Yeah.
due to starvation or disease as weakened individuals become more susceptible.
Right, right.
Some deer might try to swim to other islands in search of better resources. Some might even resort to eating things they wouldn't normally, trying to adapt to the scarcity.
Yeah, it's a reminder that nature can be pretty harsh.
Yeah,
Even in a place like a peaceful island,
absolutely.
really drives home the point that unchecked growth just isn't sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah. And this brings us to a critical point: human intervention.
Yeah.
Sometimes, to help maintain a healthy ecosystem, we step in and try to manage populations.
Okay.
So in the case of our island deer, this could involve controlled hunting
Right.
to reduce the population to a more sustainable level, or habitat restoration
Okay.
to increase that carrying capacity.
So we're acknowledging that humans are part of this,
Yeah,
not just, observing.
absolutely. Yeah. And our actions can have, a ripple effect throughout ecosystems.
Okay.
Sometimes those effects are unintentional. But by understanding these principles of growth and limitation, we can make, more informed choices about how we interact with the natural world.
All right. Well, we've explored the drama of deer on an island.
Yeah.
Ready to dive into a different ecosystem
Yeah, let's
to see how these concepts play out underwater.
Our next stop takes us to the world of lakes,
Okay.
where we'll explore a phenomenon that might seem beautiful at first glance,
Okay.
but can actually be a sign of ecological imbalance:
Right.
algal blooms.
Algal blooms. They sound kind of harmless, like underwater gardens.
Right.
What's
Yeah.
the problem with a little extra greenery in a lake?
Well, it's not that the algae itself is inherently bad.
Okay.
In fact, algae are crucial primary producers
Mm.
of aquatic ecosystems, forming the base of the food web. The problem arises when certain types of algae grow out of control, creating those thick, soupy blooms that we often see.
So it's about balance again.
Exactly, yeah.
Too much of a good thing.
Too much of a good thing can become a bad thing.
Right.
Yeah.
What causes these blooms to go haywire?
Often, the culprit is an excess of nutrients, particularly phosphorus,
Okay.
entering the lake. Think of it like over-fertilizing your garden.
Okay.
Too much of a good thing can lead to unintended consequences.
Right.
And just like we saw with the deer, this excess of resources can trigger rapid, unchecked growth.
So it's like the all-you-can-eat buffet again.
Yeah,
Only this time it's the algae going to town.
exactly. Yeah.
Where does all this extra phosphorus come from?
A lot of it comes from human activities: agricultural runoff, overflowing sewage systems, even lawn fertilizers, they all contribute to nutrient pollution in our waterways. And that excess phosphorus acts like a booster shot for certain types of algae, allowing them to outcompete other species and dominate the ecosystem.
So it's like we're inadvertently creating the perfect conditions
Yeah.
for these algal blooms to explode.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of limiting resources comes into sharp focus. So you see, even if there's an abundance of sunlight and water, if one crucial nutrient, in this case phosphorus, is in short supply, it can act as a bottleneck, limiting overall growth.
It's like the saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Exactly.
So in this case, phosphorus is that weak link for the whole lake.
Exactly, yeah. And when we flood the system with excess phosphorus, we're essentially removing that limiting factor,
Gotcha.
allowing certain types of algae to just go wild. But it's not just about aesthetics.
Right.
These dense algal blooms can have a cascade of negative effects on the entire lake ecosystem.
Okay, so it's not just about the lake looking a bit murky.
Right.
What are some of the real consequences of these out-of-control algal blooms?
Well, for starters, these thick mats of algae, they can block sunlight from reaching the bottom of the lake.
Okay.
And that can kill off important aquatic plants that provide habitat and food for other organisms.
So it's like pulling the rug out from under the whole food web.
Exactly, yeah. And as these massive blooms die off, they decompose, which consumes a huge amount of oxygen in the water.
Okay.
This can lead to what we call dead zones, where fish and other aquatic life simply can't survive.
So it's like this domino effect, right?
Yeah.
Starting with excess nutrients, and then you get these massive blooms,
Yeah.
and it ultimately impacts the entire lake.
Exactly. And this brings us to another important point. These algal blooms aren't just an ecological problem, they can also impact human health.
Oh, wow.
Some types of algae produce toxins that can make people sick if they come into contact with the water
Right.
or consume contaminated fish.
So it's a reminder that these seemingly isolated events in nature
Yeah,
can have pretty far-reaching consequences.
absolutely. And it highlights the importance of understanding those delicate balances within ecosystems and how our actions can sometimes disrupt them.
Okay, so we've seen how these principles of growth and limitation play out in specific places,
Yeah.
like islands and lakes. But I'm thinking about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
How do these concepts apply to Earth as a whole?
That's a great question. And it's one that, scientists and thinkers have been grappling with for decades. If we zoom out and look at our planet from a systems perspective, we can see that the same principles we've been discussing apply on a global scale.
So you're saying that even Earth itself has a carrying capacity, a
Exactly.
limit to how much life it can support.
Precisely. Just like that island with limited resources, our planet has finite amounts of land, water, clean air, and other essential ingredients for life to thrive.
It's a humbling thought
Yeah.
that even something as vast as Earth has these boundaries.
It is, and it's something we need to be, acutely aware of as our human population continues to grow and our consumption patterns intensify. We see signs of those planetary boundaries being pushed all around us: climate change, deforestation, biodiversity loss, pollution. These are all symptoms of a system under stress.
Yeah, it's a lot. Is there anything we can do, or is it all just doom and gloom?
There's always hope, but it requires a shift in our mindset. We need to move away from this idea of endless growth and embrace the concept of living within our planetary boundaries.
Yeah.
This means being mindful of our consumption patterns,
Right.
reducing our environmental footprint, and finding innovative ways to meet our needs without depleting the Earth's resources.
It sounds like a monumental challenge. Where do we even begin?
It starts with awareness. Understanding these principles of growth and limitation is the first step.
Okay.
Then it's about making conscious choices in our daily lives, supporting sustainable practices, advocating for policies that protect our environment, and fostering a sense of interconnectedness with the natural world.
So it's not just about individual actions.
Right.
It's about systemic change as well.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this intricate web of life,
Yeah.
and that our actions have ripple effects throughout the system.
Well, that's a powerful message. So as we wrap up this this deep dive, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to hold on to?
Remember that limits aren't necessarily a bad thing. They're simply a reality of life on Earth. And by understanding and respecting those limits, we can actually unlock new possibilities for innovation, creativity, and a more harmonious relationship with our planet.
So it's about finding ways to thrive within those boundaries
Yeah.
rather than constantly trying to push past them.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that a healthy and sustainable future depends on our willingness to embrace the concept of enough.
I love that. It's not about deprivation. It's about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
where we can meet our needs without compromising the needs of future generations.
And that's the beauty of this whole exploration. Understanding how nature works helps us make better choices for ourselves and for the planet.
Well, this has been an eye-opening deep dive from the microscopic world of cells to the vast expanse of our planet.
Yeah.
We've seen how growth is this fundamental force in nature, but it's always subject to limitations.
Right.
And by understanding those limits, we can start to reimagine our relationship with the natural world
Yeah.
and build a more sustainable future for all.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you, and I hope our listeners are walking away with a renewed sense of wonder and a deeper appreciation for the intricate balances that sustain life on Earth.
Absolutely. A huge thanks to you for sharing your expertise with us.
You're welcome.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the limits to growth in nature. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning from this incredible world around us. Until next time.